Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of the Arc of Thoughts podcast. Today's episode, we're discussing about the topic of, are we British? What does it mean for us who have our heritage within the subcontinent and who are primarily Muslim? And I want to reiterate this point that when we're talking about our identity, first and foremost, our identity, we classify ourselves as Muslims. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only thing that we are, or that's the only thing that we identify as. There are other identities that a person can hold as well. We know very well, if we look around the world, you get people that are dual nationals. I think even like you can get triple nationals, I think, potentially as well.
I'm dual national.
Got dual national right here then. So our identity is a complex thing. And what we want to talk about today is, whilst many of us are second generation, maybe even third generation, where our families have moved from the subcontinent, or not just the subcontinent, but from the Arab lands or from any other country, do we categorize ourselves as British? What does that mean? How does that impact our lifestyle? What does that mean about our values as well? Are we throwing away the values that we hold dear, and taking on a new set of values? So these are some of the things that that we want to talk about. Like we mentioned already, we're Muslims primarily, Kasim. That's our identity first and foremost. But we're talking more in terms of like a geographical concept about where we live, and the sort of impacts that we have in the society that's around us. We're not talking about here about being patriotic. Okay. That's a complete different sort of angle. And I don't know about you, Kasim, but do you see Britain as a patriotic country? I know that you have like obviously the far right, in terms of like political ideologies. You also have racist groups as well, yep. Racist political groups as well. But do you see Britain to be like a heavily patriotic society, something similar to maybe like America?
I don't see Britain to be patriotic on the whole, but there are, parts of society which do hold on to being British or being from this country. And more than being British, I'd say it's more being Anglo-Saxon. More of this concept of maybe being white with blue eyes, or green eyes or blonde hair. Mm-hmm. They hold on more than that, because even a person who's born here, he has a bit of darker complexion on his skin. Mm-hmm. He's not considered British, even though he may be British and he may be born here. So I think, as you said, it comes more like from racist sort of thoughts and ideas, mm-hmm. Where people hold on to the value of, if you're white, you're better than somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that really represents the British people.
Yeah, I agree. Like on the whole, these kind of like far right ideological groups are minorities, yeah. And they aren't a representative of the whole. And the way that I see Britain as like essentially a multicultural melting pot, and a lot of that is due to colonialism, Kasim. Yeah. Like, we can't deny that. And whilst colonialism looted and polluted many countries around the world, and left huge stains on many countries around the world, we know about like the atrocities and the crimes that were committed, where food was held back, people were left hungry, people were looted, people were killed, hung. The crimes are many. But at the same time, that was a generation of people at that particular time. We're now living in 21st century Britain. Essentially, when we're talking about our identity, we're not talking about absorbing other people's thoughts or other people's values or other people's ideas. More, we're talking about what do we offer to the society that's around us. And I think that's the sort of line that we're trying to take here, isn't it, Kasim?
Yeah, in today's episode.
About the lack of some people who maybe don't consider themselves to be British and therefore don't contribute to society in a positive way, or because they don't consider themselves to be British, they hold back providing benefit to society.
Yes.
Because it's basically they have a mentality of it's us versus them. And I think I think what it is, we just want to discuss that, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just want to talk about that. So I don't know, like, what's your initial views? Them 2 points I've just talked about now, like, what are your initial views on that?
I think this comes from maybe a lot of aspects of society, but there are many people who do live in Britain, who do have this idea that maybe because their roots are from a different place, they don't identify themselves as British. And because they don't identify themselves as British, they don't have this sort of, how do I say this, this feeling that they need to contribute to society. I will identify as British, and my role as being a British person or being a British citizen is to give benefit to the society and the community I'm living in. And this can be the same for a person who's born in Britain, his entire heritage is British, but if he doesn't offer anything good to society, to his community, he doesn't give any benefit, then I don't regard that person as British, because he's doing nothing for his country. And the whole point of being in the country was for its betterment and for its growth and for its prosperity.
Yeah.
That's where I view things.
I think that's the thing. I think like every nation or every group of people on earth should know that there are flaws within them.
Yeah.
Because that's part of being human. And essentially, like, I think the way that we see it is, we as young British Muslims, we have something that we want to give back to society. We have something that we want to leave behind.
Yeah.
Within our society, and to contribute towards a betterment. Like, we're not just talking in terms of like infrastructure, so being involved in terms of like the education system, or being involved in other means of contributing towards the society in terms of like with our skills and with what we have, but at the same time, like, on the grassroots level, educating people to contribute towards what's going to be better for them, not just in this generation but in future generations as well. And I think that's what we're trying to say. Like, some of the values that we hold dear, Kasim, are not necessarily British values, or rather not necessarily practiced within British society.
Yes.
So what we're trying to say is, when you identify yourself as British, when you say that, I'm not, it's not us against them, it's not they're one group of people and I'm a separate group of people, and the people are like me, we're just going to stick to ourselves and we're going to do whatever we want to do. No, the point is, what we're trying to say is, we sort of come together, and what we have that's good within us, we contribute that, to make the people around us have, inshallah, better values, better way of life, better understanding of the outlook of life as well. And I think that's what we're trying to say. And I think the flip side is looking at it on the other side as well, is like, what have we taken by being in this country, by being British?
Yes.
Not necessarily just we, as in me and you, but like our society, what have we gained by living as Muslims in the West, or living in Britain? And there's a huge amount. Obviously we know that a lot of the early generation of Muslims, when they came to this country, whether they came from Africa, whether they came from the subcontinent, whether they came from wherever in the world, their main game was like materialistic, so to speak.
Economic benefit.
Economic benefit.
Economic opportunity was here in the West.
Whereas their idea or their understanding was, once they reaped the rewards in terms of wealth or whatever it was, their idea was to go back home. And I think, like, if you look at that early generation and what tended to happen, it was quite slow in terms of like setting up infrastructure or things like that, because there was always that mentality of, we're going back home.
Yeah, they don't have this option. They don't have this idea of staying here.
Yeah, and I think there's a different mentality between wanting to stay here and wanting to return home. Because when you want to return home, we're talking homelands, you don't set up things, because you don't feel that there is a need to invest in such things. Like, for example, like just masjids, madrasas, for teaching kids, or even masajid to pray in. These were things that weren't really common in the early generation. But I think so that mentality still exists up until this day. Whilst there are people who have been born and bred in this country, and they have never lived within their homelands, their respective homelands, they still have this idea that we don't want to contribute to society, whether that be with our wealth or whether that be with our skills. Whilst they've reaped the rewards of being within the country, like for example, we take things for granted that we have here. For example, such as like education system. It's unfortunate that there are many kids around the world that don't have access to education because it's just not available, or they have to pay for their education, and unfortunately they don't have the means to do so. And we, on the other hand, we have the polar opposite. We have people who don't have any passion or understanding that I'm being educated for free here, and I'm getting a free education. Now, what does all this mean for us now, Kasim? We should be contributing. I think that's what we're trying to say here. But how do you change like the person's mentality if they live here, they've spent a large amount of their time here, and they have no tangible aims, or they're not setting aside any actions of actually going back to their homelands. They're going to stay here. What do you say about like people like that?
It's a sad reality that we are facing. As you said, there are many individuals, many people in this country who are here just for the good things of the country, and in most part, they don't want to give back. How do we change a person's mentality or perspective? I'm not really sure about that, to be honest. But I would say one thing is, if you don't have this desire of this sort of idea of staying here, then why don't you, just for a trial run, go back to your homeland and see if you really enjoy it there, and see how attached you really are to the people there and to your values that you hold dearly to yourself. And then make a lifestyle change. Either you contribute there positively, you contribute here positively. But my belief is that wherever you are in the world, you should be making a positive contribution to whatever place you're in. That's one fundamental belief that I have. Wherever you are, you should not be making negative impact. Rather, it should be positive in whatever way you can.
I find it funny about what you mentioned earlier, actually. But off camera, we talked a bit about this, and we were talking about there are people who have this idea or this understanding that I'm not British whilst they are in Britain, but as soon as they leave Britain or they leave the British Isles or they leave Europe and they go to their homelands, then immediately they pull out their red passport and say, no, I'm not Indian, I'm not Pakistani, I'm not Bangladeshi, I've got my red passport.
I'm British.
Yeah, I'm British. And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, every person contributes in a different manner. Every person assists in terms of their like society and how they help in a different manner. But I think the main thing is just getting out of this like head shift or this headspace of it's us against them. Or some people have it too black and white of like it's good versus evil, or these kind of ideas. And this I think is quite like a childish mentality, because this is how like kids think. And whilst we're here, whilst we're living within the country, Kasim, like my understanding, my objective, like for example, when I speak to non-Muslim friends or people that I know that aren't Muslim, it's not necessarily that I want them to become Muslim. I'd love them to become Muslim if it was their choice. Okay, but we say in Deen we have no compulsion. We don't force Deen on anybody. That's not the way that Islam works. And if somebody chose to become Muslim, alhamdulillah, we're not going to say no to them. But I think what we're trying to say is that what we want to give to our non-Muslim neighbors, or what we want to give to our non-Muslim friends, is some of the values that we hold dear. What we hold, like for example, the way that our families work, and the helping nature that exists within our families, the Islamic values and morals that we hold dear. For example, just like honesty and the justice system that we have, and all the other principles that are attached around and with Deen in our dealings with people, socially, or in like in our financial dealings as well. I I think, staying away from like cheating and lying. These are the kind of things that we want to sort of mash with British society, and make the changes so that essentially Britain becomes a positive place.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It's funny how I was having a conversation with somebody at work. He came to me and he goes, I didn't know you couldn't drink alcohol. And I said, yeah, as Muslims we're not allowed to drink alcohol. So he said, why? I said, because according to us, it's something which is forbidden, because inside alcohol there's more actual harm than benefit. The Quran doesn't negate that there is a benefit, but it mentions that there's actually more harm. That's why it's prohibited in Islam. So I said to him, like, for example, in Britain, unfortunately, every year, how many people do get killed accidentally from drink driving? How many people, unfortunately, we have here cases of assault and rape and these sort of different things. And that's most of these are because somebody's under the influence of alcohol. I said, this is the reason why this is why us as Muslims, we don't drink, because we see all the disadvantages of drinking, which I really think British society could use. And he said to me, he goes, I never really looked at it that way, but you do make a fair point. And I said, yeah, it's just something for you to think about. And like you said, we here as Muslims, and here, I think we have an opportunity to present our Islam to the non-Muslims. I believe we have a lot of solutions to their problems.
Yeah.
I believe we have actually all the solutions to their problems. But as you said, there's no compulsion. We're just here to present to them what we have, what we hold, what our principles are, what our values are. And if they want to accept, they can accept. If they don't, that's up to them. But we're not here to force anybody.
I think you've summarized that fantastically. That last sort of 1 minute, 2 minutes that you mentioned here, that's exactly, essentially that's what we have to offer. Like you said, it's our belief as Muslims that Islam provides the solutions to all the world's problems. Like, and this is the thing. Like, sometimes living in the West and the way we take certain things that exist within the West as things that have always existed and will always exist. But you've given like a classic example of alcohol. There's the other example of like interest as well.
Yeah.
And the Islamic finance model is based around no interest. And some people like are naive enough to believe that interest is the only way, and it's not. The Islamic model is perfectly viable, and that's obviously something that another thing that we can offer as well. And I think this is the thing, like, within Islamic history, when you look at great personalities who offered fantastic things, they didn't limit themselves just to their little community of Muslims, or just only limit themselves to their community of the people who they considered their own. But no, their benefit was for everybody, and everybody took benefit from that. And I think that's what we're trying to say. Like, we're not saying lose your values. We're not saying that sell yourself out. We're not saying lose your Islam. No, that's primary. We are Muslim first and foremost, and we are proud to be Muslims as well. And the values and the teachings of Islam, which we adhere to, we believe them to be the truth. We also believe them to be the solutions to our problems, like you mentioned as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we force that on everyone. But we want to share. We want to share. And this is an interesting point, that you can only share with those people who you deem to be close to.
Yeah.
If you believe it's us and them, I'm the good and you're the enemy, you're not willing to share.
And that's where and I personally believe we should never ever look at a person in that sort of manner of us and them. It's always we. And like I said, going back to this point of giving benefit to the country that you're in, making a positive change, becoming a means of good in your society, is only going to make the life that you live, your community that you live in, better. And I see, for example, a lot of our counterparts who are living in this country have a lot of problems. One thing that pains me is that when I see a lot of children growing up in single parent families, and that's most of the time because maybe the father doesn't want to take responsibility, or the mother doesn't want to take responsibility. Now again, alhamdulillah, in Islam, as Muslims in this country, we live in families. We support, or children are supported until a certain age, and they go into their own house, and they're not forced out their house to fend for themselves or to fight for themselves, making their life very, very difficult. And you see a lot of people, especially our British counterparts, they have a lot of problems like this, which I think we could, easily solve their problems. If we were approachable and we deem them as our equals, because they are our equals, we'll never ever look down upon anybody. And the thing is, if we look down on people, then we can never ever benefit them, because we always have this thing that we're superior when in actual fact we're not. We're just the same. We were just lucky that Allah gave us Islam, and that was it. We were just lucky in that sense. We didn't do anything special.
I think you've mentioned like some really good points here. I just want to wrap up with like the final sort of point, that at the same time, like we mentioned, we believe Islam to be the truth. We believe Islam to be the source of salvation, and if somebody by their choice chooses to become Muslim, that's fantastic. And like I said, primarily we are Muslim, but at the same time we also classify ourselves as British. We put the tick boxes as British, and there are many people in society who are now choosing Islam. There are many people who are what's the word I'm looking for here? Their heritage has always been British. They've grown up within only British communities where there's not been any Muslims, or where maybe Islam has been talked about in a negative manner, and they are now choosing Islam. There's some like classic cases. I think there's in the Netherlands there was that particular individual who I can't remember his name, who was a far right political activist, who's now become Muslim. And very recently, I think Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad from Cambridge, there's a famous clip that's going around on social media, where he's mentioned that there's like a senior cabinet minister, a senior advisor of a cabinet minister in Parliament is actually an undercover Muslim. Now, I'm fairly sure the Tory party are probably trying to figure out who this person is. But I don't doubt that that's not the only individual. I'd bet my bottom dollar that there's more that exist. And unfortunately, with the roles that they have in their society, it might mean that they aren't as open about their Islam. And we know people who are like that. But they still have their part to play as well. In terms of bettering society, and that's what their objectives are as well. I think that's fantastic. It's a strange situation, but like I said, like it's not all doom and gloom. And that, I think that's the whole sort of one of the ideas of this podcast, and what we want from our listeners is people who stand up and take action, who have good values, who are true to themselves, who are confident about their religion, about Islam, confident in their own skills and their own abilities, and become people who contribute towards wider society, and show a good image of Islam, essentially. That's essentially what we're looking at. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
You mentioned earlier in the podcast just opportunities that we have in the West, especially in Britain, alhamdulillah. We have many things here which are not accessible to other people in the world, and especially being a Muslim, first and foremost we identify as Muslims. Is that if we have these opportunities which are in front of us, and we have no, barriers in front of us, then we should be making the best of these opportunities, and not only give a benefit to ourselves in Britain, but if we can make a positive effect to the rest of the world, then we should be doing that as well. Whatever capabilities that we have, whatever opportunities that we have, go for them, use them, and utilize them. And another thing I want to talk about being British. For us being British, or for me being British, is if you are educated, you can speak the language, you understand the society in, then you're British. And now I'll say this, I might get some stick for it, but there are people who are British, who are born in this country, their ancestry is British, but they're not British because they don't offer anything to society. They're not educated. They don't provide any goodness to the country. So I don't see them as British. I see the person who's working for his society, working for his community, making a positive change, being a good role model. I see that person as being British, as long as he's benefiting the country that he's in. And whichever country that you go to, one day you may move, you may become a citizen of that country and better that country, but wherever you are, you'll identify as that, because that's just our geographical strait that we're in.
I think, to end with, the alternative question is to ask ourselves is, are we Muslim then? We've talked about are we British, and we've talked about that aspect, and we're talking about like contributing to society, helping society, wanting its betterment, being a well-wisher, etc., etc. So the question that we all have to ask ourselves now is, okay, we've talked about it in terms of like a nationality. Like we said, we're not talking about being patriotic and screaming from the rooftop saying I'm British and I don't want you to get like your St George's flag out and fly it around and go a bit gung ho and a bit crazy. That's not what we're advocating for. But the question we all have to ask ourselves now is, are we Muslim then? Are we contributing towards Islam in a beneficial manner? Are we fulfilling the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? These are all things that, the internal questions more. We are, at the end of the day, our friends, our community, as long as we proclaim to be Muslims outwardly, then they are going to call us Muslims. But at the end of the day, we know the state of ourselves. We know what's inside of our hearts. We know what our actions are showing. And that's a question that we all need to ask ourselves as well. Requires a bit of thought, as do all things. I'm sure that we've not covered everything in this particular podcast as well. Something slightly different, I think, in terms of like a topic area. And it's just something that we wanted to talk about and discuss. Might have got a few things wrong as well, to be honest. And at the end of the day, all of these things, like calling yourself British, sometimes it might be a bit of a difficult title, especially because of the connotations of nationalism, of people who are patriotic, and also like things to do with imperialism and like the British Empire. And it can be difficult, and I completely understand where, especially like the elder generation, when they tell us stories about what has happened within like our own families, our own people, it's difficult. I completely understand that, but at the end of the day, we're here, we're living in this country now. Here is where we are. At least I'm talking to those who from our audience are British. I think there's about 20% who might not be British, but essentially to substitute the word British to whichever country that you're based in, it's difficult sometimes. I know it is, because of sometimes the way the media works, the way that we are being portrayed as Muslims. It's not easy, but just remember, I think the main thing to remember here is the majority are not like that. The majority of people are not like that. They are very welcoming, friendly people who want to see us positively contribute in society. Sometimes they might say it wrong, or sometimes their actions might be wrong. But inshallah, if we show ourselves in a good light, it's only going to work to our betterment. Inshallah, please do hit the like button. Do subscribe to follow our journey. And inshallah, we'll see you in the next episode, in which we are talking about productive Muslims. And some like tips and tricks maybe about being productive. I think we might touch a bit upon like procrastination as well, Kasim. I'm a bad procrastinator. I am going to admit.
So am I.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that in the next episode. Inshallah, see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.